Record. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode at YogiRise podcast with me, your host Jen. And today I have got an exciting guest, Joanne Coates here, who is I only met last July through Healy, and ever since I met her, she got the funnest bits of knowledge I've ever known anyone to have. Joanne, I feel like every time I look at your Instagram, it's like another conspiracy theory and more and more and more things. And I'm like, ah! So, hi, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think either fun bits of knowledge or useless bits of information sometimes. But yeah, I think that sums me up pretty much. Love a conspiracy. Just love anything off the grain, off the grid, anything a little bit different. So yeah, and thank you for having me here.
Of course. So, one of the things, Joanne has her own podcast, and the episodes that I first listened to, I think it's like, is it not like the second or third episode? It's quite early on in the podcast.
Yeah,
And it
yeah, I
was
think it
one
is.
of the best podcasts listening to it. And I was like, as if I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, like, what? And so, for the listeners, for obviously you don't know what it is, it's about witches and it's about embracing your inner witch. And it just gives you like fun knowledge and facts about back in the day, but also how it resonates with modern day. And I found it so interesting. So, I've asked Joanne very kindly to come and speak a little bit about it. So, Joe, to
Yeah.
start, can you just explain to people what being a witch means to you?
Yeah, so for me, my witch journey, I guess, has been over the last it, since as long as I can remember, first of all. But the past few years, I've really just honed in on there's lots and lots of different kind of witches. But for me, it's connecting back to nature. It's connecting to plants. It's connecting to animals. It's getting outside and it's using the feelings, the magic that I get from connecting with these to then work on my manifestations, work on my emotional health, my spiritual health, my mental health. So I use plants and nature to do that. Some other witches will make spells. There's kitchen witches. There's eclectic witches. So I do use crystals and pull oracle cards as well, but I'm more so drawn to nature. So for me, being a witch is just tuning into those things that make you feel magical. And magic isn't all about pulling rabbits out of hats and making people disappear. It's when it's when things go right in your life. It's when you make a wish or a manifestation or set a goal or have a dream or a target and it actually happens. And when you track back, it's just certain things you've done, certain things that you've said, certain feelings that you've had, which is the magic. That is the spell. It's putting it out there into the universe. And a lot of people don't realize they're doing it. A lot of people don't want to tune into that. So yeah, that's what it is for me. It's about tuning in and letting the magic happen.
Oh, I love that. And am I right in saying that witches, as in years and years ago, the witches that were burnt at the stake, they were women who like lived outside the societal norm. Is that right? It wasn't necessarily they were doing spells or they were doing any of these types of things.
Yeah. So it would have been. So I'll give just a brief history. It was any woman that went against this new. I'm just label it with the patriarchy. It's the patriarchy and the church. So that came along and didn't want women to have this power, of course. And this we'll talk a little bit about the witch wound. So they came along, and it would have been unmarried women who were fending for themselves and didn't need a man, independent women over 22, I think it was, 25, very young, again, unmarried, no children, were seen as outsiders. the older women who lived on their own, owned their own homes, used plants to make medicines, would heal, would use the moon, would gather together. You know, we used to have the red tents. Women would gather together and, you know, share with each other during their bleeds. You know, they would use the moon to help to guide them. And when the church came along, you know, men came along, patriarchy came along, and it was kind of like, hang on a minute, all these women are doing all of these things and we don't want them to. So we're going to put in these rules. And that's when the burning, the hanging, the witches, there was even handbooks. I can never remember the name because it's like a magnificent Magna Carta or something, with a literal handbook for husbands of how, if it was modern day, how to control your wife and to stop her being a witch. And it was like, don't let women gather together because of their sharp tongues. So this is where like gossip comes from. So when women get together now, and you know, if we were sat talking, we could be talking about anything. Someone could see us and go, oh, they were just gossiping. And gossip has a negative kind of connotation. Even if we were talking about the most innocent thing in the world, not gossip, it could have that, you know, that gossip. And that's where that comes from, our sharp tongues. And again, it was about keeping women quiet, keeping women small, and taking that little bit of power from them. It was even like midwives. So it would have been, you know, before universities, etc., there would have been a woman in the village who would have been, I don't know if they would have voted for her, but she would have been the midwife. And I don't know how they would have picked it. I'm guessing she would have just decided, I want to be the midwife. So she would have been the midwife. She would have had the plants, you know, the herbs, helping women to give birth. You know, there was no sort of hospitals back then like we have now. They were also labelled witches because, you know, they were working with medicines that these men at the time didn't understand. So it was a big shift in how we worked as women, and how we lived together as women, and how we ran homes as women. Yeah, it wouldn't have, you know, this witch wound is deep within us as well. It's still here in modern day.
So I have a question on that. So you were saying how women were the midwives and they were known as witches, but I'm assuming that that was okay because they were helping like the village. Is that get any relation to the fact that was it not mostly men who were doctors, like when all that started to come out?
There probably wasn't doctors as we know them now. It would have just been women tending, you know, to their families in their homes and maybe outside the village. So think of, what's the movie? You know, have you seen the Hunger Games? The Hunger Games movie. Her mum, and she's like the medicine woman, and she sort of like learns off her mum what herbs to use, and you know, when she's out there in the Hunger Games, she knows what herbs to gather to heal her leg and that type of thing. That's how it would have been. So it would have been more, that was the woman's job within the home, but then you would have had the women that were a little bit better at it. So they would have been like the main one that you go to in the village. So, you know, oh, you've got a headache, go and see Jen. She has the best herbs for headaches. So people would come to see you. The same with the midwives. They would have, you know, had that one particular woman that you would, you know, team up with when you were pregnant. She would look after you. She would guide you through it. Probably one of the older women that, you know, so there wasn't doctors then as such. Men would have been having the labouring jobs. So these would have been seen as the jobs for women. And then once the church came in and they were then like, this is magic. This is what women doing here. We need to sort of put a stop to this. They would then label it as, you know, witchcraft, and the connotation that we have around witches is negative, and that's where it stems from. Yeah, it was the church, the patriarchy that came in and was like, just didn't like what we were doing, basically.
And you also said in one of the episodes about the word maniac and lunatic.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so really interesting. I love looking at the etymology of words. And again, a lot of these, when we look at the etymology of words, and some words that we perceive in modern day had a completely different meaning back then. And so lunatic was used, and there's hysteria. So I'll do lunatic first. lunatic, obviously lunar, associated with the moon. So it would have been women originally as well that would have been called lunatics around the full moon if they were acting a little bit strangely. Oh, she's a lunatic. And it could be just women that were using the moon. Like, I follow the moon. I know what moon cycle we're in, and I'll use it for manifestation. I use it to release. When I get my period, I check where the moon is at, and I keep track of what the moon is doing and what my body is doing. So 500 years ago, that would have they'd probably labeled me a lunatic because I was living against the moon, and that would have been like, why are you doing that? That is not the way that you should be living. So that's where that, and obviously over the years, that's just grown and grown and grown with those negative connotations. And, we have then from that loony bin, which again, psychiatric hospital, it's not a loony bin, but again, we would say it flippantly, but that's where it comes from. And that's where it stems from, just the moon, the lunar. And hysteria, so the word hysterectomy as well. Women back then and after the witch trials, so it was seen as a very negative. So when women were in their witch era, let's just call it, being feminine and being in touch with your sexuality was okay. It was fine. Women were allowed to do that kind of thing. As women were quietened and made smaller, this is where it came through of ladylike, and you need to act this way, and God forbid a woman should have sexual urges. So I think it was around, I might not get the dates right, 1800s or so, women who basically had sexual urges, and if they were found coming on to a man or wanting to have sex with a man, she would have been labeled hysterical, and she could have got locked up for that. And then because hysterical is, the prefix, the hyster part is linked to the womb, so that's how it links to women, and that's why we have a hysterectomy. So hyster is the womb, the rectomy is to remove, and that's where that comes from. But hysteria, and it's really creepy, but I think like in the Victorian ages, if a woman was diagnosed with hysteria, they would go to the doctors, and the doctors would release them of their hysteria. And yeah, I know it's gross.
What does that mean?
But, like, and just releasing. So sexual release, using their hands or a machine or something, they would do that to release the hysteria. And that would have been seen as like the devil leaving the body as well. So the devil would go to specific. I know, it's so creepy, it's so weird. But that would be then seen as that entity leaving the body, rather than it being an urge, a natural urge. That would have been seen. There's so much around the sexuality of women. I know, it's crazy. It is crazy.
That is crazy.
Yeah, and we had to sort of, and even now, and women do the same. So just touching onto the witch wound, again, overly, we would say that, oh, she's overly sexualized. And we have, the differences between a sexualized man and a sexualized woman. A sexualized man is never looked at in the same way as a sexualized woman. And this is sort of where it stems from, this keeping women small and, this competition and this judgment. Like if you think of, I don't know, Leonardo DiCaprio, Hollywood Lothario, we all know that all his girlfriends are 26 years old and all, young. He likes 26-year-olds. There's that joke, isn't there? I don't know if you heard of it, but he once his girlfriend hits 26, he dumps them. Look it up. It's like it's a thing. But that's, we laugh at that, and it's like, God. But then when a woman has a younger, now I've seen Cher recently in the news, and her husband's way younger, and it has a completely different connotation. And like, oh God, her husband's like 40 years younger than her, and it's not celebrated in the same way. It's seen as like, ugh. And we still do that today. And we still sort of, if women, might be scrolling on Instagram, if someone's in her underwear or she's showing a bit too much skin, it's kind of pre-programmed in us to be a little bit judgmental against those women. But again, it all comes back to these small boxes that we were put into from like the 1500s onwards.
And where do you feel like, so the Salem witch trials, how did that shape our understanding of witchcraft, and do you feel that's associated with the female trauma that we have now, like the whole empowerment
Yeah.
and oppression type thing
So
with females?
yeah, so the witch trials were all over the world as well. So Salem's like the one, I can't remember the numbers, but tens of thousands of women were killed. There were also men killed in the witch trials for maybe aiding and abetting women. So during that time as well, so say we knew the witch hunters were going to come, and I was a medicine woman, and they approached you, and you may also be a medicine, and it wouldn't have been, it's, and when we talk about spells and witchcraft, we automatically think Hollywood. We automatically think, broomsticks and flying around the sky. But the witchcraft wouldn't have been, it's not that kind of magic. That's the Hollywood magic that, again, has been sort of filtered through from the early days, which was it, like the Wizard of the Wicked Wizard. What's her name? The Wizard of Oz, the witch in that green nose, the big hat. Yeah, the Wicked Witch of the West. That's what I was after. So that sort of, again, we've grown up with that. Pre that, there wouldn't have been witches have big long noses and a green face. So that sort of crept in with the introduction of movies and stories, and then people hook onto this witch. So she must be ugly, she must be evil. But the witches were just normal women, and the witches were just medicine women. They were the healers of the village. They were, like I say, the midwives. They were just women who were strong, independent women that didn't need a man at the time. But again, that was seen as a negative. So there wasn't this witchcraft as such as we know it now. Of course, their spells would have been manifestation spells. And yes, they might have been making love spells, but if you're manifesting and you're writing in your journal and you're doing that, it's a spell, it's casting a spell. If you're sending out, if you're talking to the universe or talking to yourself or talking to Goddess or so I'll talk to the elements. If you're sending out right, okay, under this new moon, I want to do X, Y, Z, or even if it's not the new moon, it could be that if you don't follow the moon, it's the 1st of April today. So this month, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and these are the steps that I'm going to take. That's you putting out a spell. It's just, we call it goals, we call it targets, But if you're sending out that magic, you're sending out those words, and that's what the women would have been doing then. So yes, love spells, hate spells, whatever we see in the movies, they would have been doing that, minus the sparks and fire, that kind of thing. It would have been, they're sending that out. It's the belief, it's the feelings, it's the manifestation of that. So that's where it's sort of, I don't know if that answered the question. I feel like I went off on it.
No, it did. I love this. I'm just like mind blown by it all. So like tell us, you obviously know a lot about this. So can you tell us where it all started? We were talking earlier, you were talking about the movie The Craft, and I was like, I love that movie. But from where it started and to kind of where you are now with modern day witchcraft.
Yeah. So, like I said, when I sent you a message earlier, I was actually thinking the other day, because I was reading a witchcraft book, and it's like, if you have that connection, if you may have been a witch in a past life, and it can start at a very early age, just from having an interest in witches, and it could be, so this is when I backtracked, and I thought, oh my God, so in junior school, I closed the girls' toilets. Like, no girls were allowed in, because that was my coven. I didn't call it a coven at the time, but now when I look back, I thought, oh my God. And I got my friends, and I was getting them, and I can't remember what name it was, but I was getting them to repeat this name in the mirror and stare in the mirror. And the longer you stare in the mirror, your face is distorted. But then I was telling my friends, like 9-10 years old, that was then the witch that they were when they were witches, and like scaring them. And I did actually get into trouble because I was telling the girls went home and said there was a witch in the toilet. But then fast forward, I must have been a teenager, year 9, and this was when the craft was big, maybe a little bit older, and I was obsessed with the craft. And even when I was watching it, can you remember the scene where she like gets her hair and it changes colour? Like,
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I was like, I can do that. And everything that happened in that wasn't like, wow, look what they're doing. It was, yeah, that's normal. When he was standing in the square, the Pentagon, and the shouting, calling the elements, and it was just completely normal to me. But obviously at the time, it was just a bit of obsession with the movie. You know, I'd watch it and watch it and watch it. I've watched it since as an adult, and I still have that. Yeah, this is normal. And then I actually covered this up. We were also doing the light as a feather, stiff as a board, light as a feather, stiff as a board. And it but again, it was in the toilets at school, and I was like, right, you all come with me. We're doing this. And I was sort of like the head witch, I guess. And then, God. So fast forward then a few years, I feel like for a long time I'd blocked it off. So, you know, as we do, because it's not seen as normal. You can't walk around, especially as, you know, 18, 19, oh, I'm a witch. And people are, you know, it's seen as weird. And if you're into that thing, it's like, oh, the weird, you know, the weird girl. And no one wants to be the weird girl as a teenager, early 20s. You know, you want to be cool, you want to be fun. So those things I didn't ever really then talk about, but I was always the witchy friend. I was always obsessed with Stevie Nicks and, you know, like witchy type things, you know, getting the tattoos. And then the American Horror Story series came out. And again, I was obsessed with The Coven. I don't know if you've seen that one. Stevie Nicks was actually in it as well. You need to watch it. I think it might be series 7. And they gather the girls together and they basically go like to witch school. But again, as I was watching that, I was thinking, this is just normal. And in all of these things, they, you know, they connect to the elements. And I wasn't ever watching it thinking this is fantasy. I was watching it like, I want to be a witch. I am a witch. And then just over the years, once I've started to drop the witch wound from me and just realizing and learning more, so just reading podcasts, basically like teaching yourself history, but it's really interesting. It's not like the history that you can learn at school. And just feeling that connection of, gosh, I feel like I've been there, and then taking it a little bit deeper. So trying to connect in a meditation and taking myself out in nature and trying to see like where I've come from. And so many times in my dreams, and now I know, I'm like, right, that's where this is coming from. I've had a recurring dream for years and years and years that I have this house that doesn't really have a proper roof, and it's just in the woods, you know, surrounded by plants, but I'm really happy there. And my bedroom is like a hole in the roof, but it's like a thatched roof. And I've had this dream so many times. So then I was like, right, I'm just going to go back to there. And that's when I was like, okay, I have this connection with nature, and I want to explore this. So through meditation, through just getting out in nature, through learning more about manifestation, and instead of just like calling on the universe, calling on the elements. And, you know, when I'm out at the beach, for example, talking to the ocean and, you know, feeling the sand, and just everywhere I go, I'll just walking the dogs, I'll look at the plants and I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. Look at that beautiful purple, and have purple flower or whatever, and just connecting. And then you start to feel the magic happening. And it is a process. You have to learn how to release the witch wound first, which again is still ingrained in us a lot. And identifying that witch wound as well, because that's something that, you know, you have to admit that you may not have been very nice to some girls, or you may have judged women or compared yourself in a negative way, and it's holding your hands up and going, yeah, I've done that. And I actually, as part of the process of releasing, wrote a letter to, I'm not going to give it to them, but just a release for me of, I'm sorry I judged, I'm sorry that, whatever it was, but this was the witch wound coming through and now I release, I understand, and, having that release of, right, I'm letting that go. That's where I'm working at now. So just really just stepping into, how can this help me? How can the elements help me? How can I learn from this to help me grow within this human sphere that we're also living in?
Oh, so many questions on that. Right, will we come off of this one and go on to the other one
Yeah.
so that we don't stop halfway through our
Yeah.
conversation? Right, I'll see you in the
Yeah.
next one.
And then
Okay,
it's
thank you, thank you, thank you.
brilliant.